The sun in New Mexico didn't shine. It punished. And that morning, it came down like judgment on the shoulders of Elias Boone, a man who had long ago made peace with being forgotten. He rode slow across cracked earth, the hooves of his old dun mare kicking up little ghosts of dust with every step. For half a day, he'd been trailing a calf that had wandered too far from the herd. But the tracks were soft now, fading into nothing like most things out here eventually did. Elias didn't mind the silence. In fact, he preferred it. Out here, the wind didn't ask questions, the rocks didn't judge, and the only voice that ever echoed was his own, if he cared to speak, which he rarely did anymore. Then came the sound. It wasn't much, just a whimper, faint as a dying breath. So soft, it might have been the wind catching wrong in the canyons. But Elias knew the sound of pain. He'd heard it in horses, in dying cattle, in men. He stopped. Saturday still in the saddle, head tilted, heart slowing. There it was again, a threadbare sound, desperate, sharp, like something unraveling from the inside. He dismounted, tied the reins to a dead limb. Slinging his rifle over his back, he moved carefully through the junipers and broken stone. The desert held its breath, and then he saw her. In a clearing circled by old cottonwoods she hung, wrists bound high above her head, body slack like a broken marionette. Her feet barely touched the dirt. Her skin was sun-dark, streaked with blood and dust. Her long black hair clung to her shoulders in matted ropes. And yet she was breathing. Barely. Above her, nailed crooked to the bark of the tree, was a crude wooden sign. Thick red paint. Jagged strokes. Words that hit like a bullet. "White man don't forgive." Elias stepped back. Something rose in his throat, bile, maybe. Or rage. The air around him thickened. The cottonwoods didn't move. Even the wind turned quiet, like it didn't want to interrupt. His hand drifted to the knife on his belt. His voice was barely a whisper. "Christ, what the hell did they do to you?" She stirred just barely. Her head dropped forward like a broken stem, and Elias caught sight of the raw, red marks on her wrists where the rope had bitten deep. He swallowed hard. "You hear me, girl?" he asked, his voice rough from dust and disuse. No answer. "I ain't here to hurt you," he added, softer now, maybe more to himself than to her. He stepped forward slowly. Each crunch of his boots in the dirt felt like it echoed too loud. The closer he got, the more he saw. She was young, maybe 18. Her jaw was strong, her brow high. Her cheeks had hollowed from thirst, and a crust of dried blood painted the corner of her lip. He reached up, fingers brushing the rope. Twisted mesquite fiber, rough, old. Whoever tied it didn't mean to kill her quick. They wanted her to suffer. His hand trembled as he pulled the knife from his belt. That sign, those words screamed at him. Not just in paint, but in memory. Things he'd heard. Things he'd believed. Things he'd never said. But maybe never stopped others from saying either. He hesitated. Then she groaned. And that small, human sound, not angry, not begging, broke something in him. "Ain't all of them," he muttered. "I ain't that." The blade slipped through the fibers. With one firm cut, the rope snapped. She fell, but Elias caught her. Just in time. She collapsed into his arms, light as dry brush, fevered and burning. Her body had no resistance left. No weight, no fight, only heat and breath and silence. Her eyes fluttered open, dark, unfocused, scared. He eased her down into the dust, one knee planted beside her. From his saddlebag, he poured water onto a cloth and dabbed it gently to her cracked lips. "Easy now," he whispered. "You're safe, at least, for the moment." She blinked again, still no words. But her hand, weak and trembling, clutched at his sleeve. Elias looked at the sign one more time, then at her. He pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her thin shoulders. "You got a name?" he asked, gentler now. No reply. "Nothin'." "All right. Guess we'll find one for you. But for now, you're with me." He stood, grunting under the effort of lifting her. Cradled her like something sacred, something half alive, not yet lost. Then turned back toward the wilderness, the shadows, and the road home. The sun was dipping low by the time Elias Boone reached his ranch, a modest patch of wood and tin clinging stubbornly to the edge of the desert, like it refused to forget how violence felt. A single windmill turned slow on the fence line. The old barn leaned like it mourned something. The house itself, One room and a loft, stood weather-beaten but upright. No fancy work, just honest boards nailed by tired hands. Elias eased the girl from the saddle and carried her inside. She burned against him, fevered and barely conscious, her breath whispering like dry leaves across stone. He laid her gently on the cot and unwrapped the coat, careful not to startle her. Her eyes opened just for a moment wide, dark, distant, but they watched him. The lantern flickered against the walls as Elias poured water into a tin basin and set it at her feet. He grabbed a clean cloth from the shelf, then knelt beside her. Her legs were scraped and bruised, one ankle swollen, her wrists angry red bands like fresh brands. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he said, not expecting an answer, just wanting to fill the air with something human. "Just cleaning up a bit." He dipped the cloth into the warm water, wrung it out. Then, slowly, carefully, he took her right foot and placed it in the basin. She flinched just barely. He posed, waited. When she didn't pull away, he began to wash. Dust and blood peeled away with each stroke. His movements were gentle, deliberate, like he was handling something sacred, something made of breath and memory. The water darkened, brown, then red. He said nothing. Neither did she. When he was done, he wrapped her feet in soft cloth and tucked a folded blanket beneath them. He sat back, wiped his hands, and looked at her. Really looked. Sharp cheekbones like ridgelines, cracked lips but full, lashes dark and heavy with sand, too young for this kind of suffering. And yet, something old behind her eyes, something that didn't flinch from pain, something that had simply waited it out. "You remind me of a river I used to camp near," he murmured. "Dry most of the year, looked dead, but after the rains, ran deep, fast. No warning." He paused, had a name, but folks just called it Quiet Snake. Don't know why, maybe 'cause it didn't hiss, just waited. He looked back at her. "I'll call you Mira," he said quietly. "Just for now. You look like a Mira, quiet but strong." She blinked once. No protest, no nod, just breath. Elias stood, grabbed a blanket, and covered her gently. "If you're hungry, there's beans. Not much, but better than air." Still, no answer. He dragged his bedroll toward the door. He'd sleep out by the barn tonight. Give her space. It didn't feel right. Not after what she'd been through. To stay in the same room. Not with the ghosts in his head. Not with the questions in her eyes. Before stepping outside, he glanced back. She had shifted just slightly. Eyes closed now. Lips no longer trembling. Beside her cot, the basin sat still, tinged with the color of what had been done to her. Elias picked it up, walked out into the darkness, and dumped the water into the thirsty ground. Inside, the girl dreamed. Of fire, of horses, of ropes slicing skyward, and of hands rough but gentle washing the pain away, without asking anything in return. The days that followed passed with the slow rhythm of desert life, but something had shifted in the silence inside the house. It wasn't hollow anymore. It was thick, charged, like the air just before a storm. Mira, as Elias still called her, ate when he brought her food, though never much. She moved cautiously. Her shoulders stayed tense, eyes always scanning, even when there was nothing to fear, like an animal long caged, still waiting for the whip. She never spoke, but Elias caught her watching him when she thought he wasn't looking. At night, he left the cot to her and took the barn for himself, his rifle always at his side. He told himself it was to give her space, but that wasn't the full truth. He was afraid, not of her, but of what her presence stirred up. That sign on the tree still burned in his memory. "White man don't forgive." Whoever wrote it hadn't just meant to kill her. They wanted her death to speak, and they might still be listening. It was the third morning when he saw it. A boot print, smaller than his, newer, pressed into the dirt just outside the barn. Military heel, cavalry issue, fresh. He crouched, studying the angle it pointed toward the barn. Not away. Elias rose slowly, scanning the ridgeline. Sagebrush, heat shimmer. Nothing moved, but something had. He walked back into the house, slow and careful. Mira sat by the window, still and silent. She didn't look at him, but her fingers tightened on the blanket across her lap. "You seen anyone?" he asked. She didn't answer, only pulled the blanket tighter. Elias nodded to himself. "I think we've got company." That evening, he kept the lantern low and stayed on the porch, rifle laid across his knees. The wind had died. Coyotes howled far off, and the stars blinked into view like ghosts remembering their names. From inside, he could hear her pacing the floor. Not fast, not frantic, just steady circles, like a clock ticking in the dark. By midday the next day, the rider came. Dust curled behind the chestnut horse as it approached from the east. The man wore blue and gold, U.S. cavalry rifle holstered, jaw rough with stubble. He looked like he hadn't slept well in days, or maybe in years. Elias stepped off the porch, one hand resting on his belt, calm but ready. "Boone," the soldier called. "Depends who's askin'." "Lieutenant Voss, Dust Hollow Station. We're tracking a fugitive." He pulled a folded sheet from his coat and handed it down. "You seen this one?" Elias took it, already knowing. A rough sketch of a young Apache girl. Long dark hair. Fierce eyes. Wanted for murder and escape. Dangerous. Reward. $500. He looked up slowly. "Can't say I have." "You sure?" The soldier leaned forward. "Small. Quiet. Might be hurt. Might be hiding. We think someone helped her out near the cottonwoods." Elias stared at the paper, then folded it in half. "Ain't seen nobody but jackrabbits and a cow with no manners." Lieutenant Voss narrowed his eyes. "She's not just a runaway, Mr. Boone. She's part of a violent group. Savages. That sign she left, she meant it." Elias clenched. "If I see anything, I'll send word." Voss held his gaze a second longer, then nodded. "See that you do." The soldier turned his horse and rode off. Elias watched the dust trail disappear beyond the ridge. Inside, Mira stood behind the curtain. She had heard every word. He stepped inside, removed his hat, rested it against the doorframe. "They came, showed me the sketch, said you were wanted." She didn't speak. I told them no. Her eyes narrowed suspicion, confusion, fear all mixing in the dark. He stirred the pot of beans, already cooked, pretending he needed something to do with his hands. "I don't know what you did, Mira. Maybe someday you'll tell me. But out here a man makes choices." He paused. "He made mine." Behind him she shifted. Just slightly. A breath. A weight. And in that moment, trust cracked the silence open, just wide enough to let something else in. The afternoon sun hung low, stretching long shadows across the yard. The air had turned still again, not peaceful, but watchful, like the desert was holding its breath. Elias Boone sat on the porch, sharpening his knife. Each slow pass of steel on stone echoed faintly, grounding him in rhythm, not thought. He wasn't carving the blade for need, not yet, but to keep his hands busy, to keep his mind from drifting toward the girl inside. Then he paused. A sound. Footsteps. Light. Human. Not a horse. Not a coyote. He turned. Mira was outside, barefoot. Blanket still draped over her shoulders, trailing behind like a second skin. Her hair braided back, her eyes forward. It was the first time she'd stepped beyond the threshold since he carried her home. Her steps were unsure at first, uneven, but they were hers. She walked slowly across the yard, past the trough, toward the barn. Elias set the knife aside and stayed seated, watching, not wanting to break the moment. She looked smaller in the sunlight, more fragile, and yet, something in her walk had changed. She wasn't escaping. She was returning to herself. When she reached the open patch of dirt near the barn, a place where the wind had swept everything clean, she knelt. Carefully, purposefully, she let the blanket slip to her elbows, then picked up a stick and began to draw in the dust. Elias rose and walked over, boots quiet against the earth. He stayed a few feet back, giving her space. She didn't look up, didn't speak, only kept tracing lines. When the image came into view, it stopped him cold. A bird, wings spread wide in mid-flight but wrapped in flames, not burning in terror, but rising through it. The lines were sharp, fierce, alive. Elias had seen war, seen symbols carved into rifles, etched onto skin. But this was older. A cry, a memory, a prayer. He crouched beside her, voice low, respectful. "What's that?" She didn't answer at first. Her face remained still. Only her hand moved, finishing the final curve of a wing. Then she whispered, voice dry as bone, "Bird in fire. My people's sign." He stayed silent. Let her speak when she was ready. She tapped the center of the drawing. This was my father's, our family. We painted it on tents, carved it on boughs. Always flying, always fire. Her shoulders pulled back. Her jaw tightened. She was bracing not for what she'd say, but for how it would feel to say it. They came, soldiers. White coats, last spring. Said we had to move. Dry place, no food, no water. Said we were danger. She paused. We said no. We stayed. We fought. Her voice thinned. They burned everything. Killed my mother. My 2 brothers. Burned the old ones inside the tents. Elias clenched his jaw. Fists curled slow. Something hot and buried stirred in his chest. I ran. I hid. They found me. Beat me. Said I took a rifle. I didn't. She turned and looked at him, her eyes sharp now, burning. I did not steal. I did not kill. I did nothing wrong. Her words rang out in the dry air, fierce and final. Elias didn't speak at first. Then his voice came, low but certain. I believe you. She turned back to the dirt, dropped the stick. Her hands fell into her lap. Then she broke. Her shoulders began to shake silent at first. Then came the sobs. Raw, unfiltered. She curled forward, arms around her knees, hair falling like a curtain. The pain poured out too big for her body, too long held inside. Elias didn't touch her, didn't try to patch it with words. Instead, he reached out and pressed his palm into the dirt beside the flaming bird. Not on her, beside her. Not comfort, testimony. Eventually, she felt it. Her breath slowed. Her body steadied. She looked up, her face streaked with tears and dust. Their eyes met. You can call me Mira, she whispered. Elias gave a small nod. His voice was gravel and wind. All right then, Mira it is. They sat together in the fading light, the firebird in the dirt glowing soft in shadow. And for the first time since he'd cut her down from that tree, the weight between them felt lighter. That night, the wind whispered low through the rafters. It slipped through the cracks in the wood like a ghost remembering its name. Inside, Elias sat by the fire, boots off, shirt sleeves rolled, tending a kettle of beans. Across the room, Mira stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself, watching the stars settle over the desert. The silence between them no longer felt like a wall. It felt like breath shared, steady. Then, softly she spoke. You want to know the truth? Elias looked up, spoon pausing mid-stir. He nodded once, careful not to chase it, not to press. She walked slowly to the table and sat across from him. Her voice was quiet, but clear. My father was a minor chief. Our band was small, peaceful. We traded with settlers. Learned their God. We had rules, boundaries. We wanted to live. Elias listened, face unreadable but still. Present. Then, one winter ago, a white woman was found dead near our hunting ground. Throat cut. She swallowed. Her husband blamed us, but everyone knew he did it. Her fingers tensed around the edge of the table. Didn't matter. They came anyway. Soldiers, ranchers, townsfolk, all with rifles and fear, said they were bringing justice. She looked away for a breath, then back. They burned our camp, shot my brothers while they slept. My mother died holding the prayer beads the priest had given her. Elias lowered his gaze. They found my father hanging from the council pole. She took a long breath. They found me hiding in a hollow tree. I had a knife for cutting rope, food. They took it. Said I was planning revenge. Said I was dangerous. Her voice grew tight. They tied me, questioned me, beat me. Then they took me to that tree, the one you found me on. Hung me up like bait. Elias's voice, when it came, was a scrape across stone. For who? Mira looked at him. For anyone still alive and angry. Silence fell again. Thicker now. Then her voice dropped low, uncertain. Why did you cut me down? He looked at her for a long time. The fire between them cracked softly. Because once, he said slowly, I didn't. Her brow furrowed. He continued, voice flat hollow. Last spring, raiders hit our ranch. Apache, they said. Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't. I was out hunting. Came back to ashes. My sister was 16. I heard her crying in the barn. But I didn't go in. I waited. Thought help would come. She died before it did. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy. Mira whispered, You saved me. Because you couldn't save her. He nodded. She studied his face. If I'd been white, Would you still have pulled the knife? Elias stood, walked slowly around the table until he stood in front of her. She looked up searching. He reached down, cupped her chin. His hand was rough, but steady. I don't love skin, he said. I love what breathes under it. Her eyes filled but no tears fell. She leaned into his hand, resting her cheek in his palm. Then, slowly, like the moment had waited its whole life to happen, they leaned in. The kiss was soft, hesitant, then deeper, as if both of them had forgotten how to exhale, and suddenly remembered. Her hands trembled on his chest, his arms wrapped around her back. The fire popped gently behind them. Later, they stood together in the small kitchen. Candlelight flickered across the walls. Their shadows moved together, slow, uncertain, but in step. Outside, the desert wind had stilled for the first time in days. Inside, something had begun to heal. The wind returned with the morning. Harder this time, it carried the scent of sand and something darker, smoke, steady and unnatural. Elias Boone felt it in his bones. A change. He'd lived long enough under open sky to know the weight of a coming storm, even the kind that wore boots instead of clouds. 3 days had passed since the kiss. 3 days since words they hadn't spoken aloud had started to take root in the quiet between them. And Mira no longer. She had become Mira Tahoma, and the way she moved proved it. She swept the floor, fed the animals, laughed once, soft and low, when Elias cursed the stubborn mule that wouldn't eat. But the piece was thin, stretched like canvas over fire. By noon, Elias saw it. A trail of dust from the east. He stood at the fence, jaw set, rifle resting against the porch. 3 riders approached. Local men, canvas coats, worn hats, rifles slung across their backs. Their leader wore a tin star that looked more self-made than official. "Boone," he called, dismounting. "Heard tell you might be harboring someone don't belong." Elias didn't blink. "You hear a lot of things, Clay. Don't make 'em true." Clay Dobbs spit in the dirt. His 2 men shifted in their saddles, fingers too close to triggers. "Apache Girl. Big reward. $50 cash. And the thanks of every God-fearing man west of the Pecos." "You came all this way for a rumor?" Elias asked. Dobbs narrowed his eyes. "We aim to check inside, just in case." Elias stepped off the porch. "You got a warrant?" Dobbs snorted. "You think this is a court, Boone?" The moment stretched. Tight. Tense. The wind catching its breath. Elias' voice stayed level. "I'm the only one lives here. Ain't no girl. Just ghosts. And goats." Dobbs stared long and hard, then gave a tight nod. "If you're lying, you'll burn with her." The men turned, rode off without checking the house. But Elias knew what that meant. They'd be back. Next time, with more men. And less patience. That night, Elias sat behind the barn, under a sky gone black with cloud. In his hand was the sign, the one he'd pulled down from that cursed tree. The one with jagged red letters that still echoed like a threat. "White man don't forgive." He stared at it, fingers brushing the old wood like it could still cut him. Then he walked to the fire pit. No speech. No ceremony. He laid it down, struck a match, watched it burn. The flame rose orange and gold, crackling as it devoured the message. The wood curled inward like even the hate didn't want to die easy. Behind him, footsteps. Mira. She wore one of his old coats, sleeves too long, rolled at the cuffs. She didn't say anything, just stood beside him, watching. The fire danced in her eyes, not just light, but memory, mourning, and something else. "Freedom. I should have burned it sooner," Elias said quietly. She didn't answer, but she stepped closer, shoulder brushing his. Her fingers knotted the coat tighter around her chest. Then, soft as breath, "Thank you." 2 words. Simple, but sacred. He looked down at her, and for the first time since that day in the clearing, there was no sign left of what had been written against her. Only flame, smoke, and the weight of what they had chosen instead. The next morning brought no wind, just stillness thick, unnatural. The kind that meant eyes were watching, even if you couldn't see them. Elias Boone rose early, packed dry biscuits, jerky, a canteen of water, tightened the saddle straps with quiet purpose. The ranch felt smaller now, like the desert was already closing in. He'd seen smoke on the eastern horizon, not the flicker of campfire, but the steady churn of men coming. They were out of time. Mira Tahoma stood by the fence line, her dark braid pulled tight, wrapped in the same coat she'd worn by the fire. Her face was still, but her eyes, they held questions. Elias didn't flinch. "We have to go," he said. "Tonight." She nodded. No surprise there. She'd known. Maybe before he did. "There's land south of here," he continued. "Past the border, Sierra Madre Mountains. Folks say your people still live free out there, far from soldiers, far from signs." He paused, then looked at her. "We can make it, if we ride hard." Mira stepped closer. So close, he could see the soft flush rising in her cheeks. She reached for his hand, held it tight. Her voice came slow, halting. "Careful. You'll come with me?" Elias didn't speak. Not right away. Instead, he leaned in, forehead to hers, breathing her in like it was the last thing keeping him grounded. Then she whispered, voice like river water over stone, "I want to live. I want to live as your wife." Elias closed his eyes. That one sentence carried more truth than 1,000 promises. By sundown, they were ready. 2 horses saddled. No note left behind. No fire. No goodbye. Just a quiet door left swinging, and a home turned memory. They rode under cover of stars. Moonlight painted the ridges silver. The desert stretched ahead like a question only the brave dared answer. Mira rode steady now, leaning low against the horse's neck. She didn't ask what lay ahead. She just followed. 10 miles from the border, the ground rose into low scrub and stone cliffs. Elias scanned the horizon constantly, every shadow a possible end. Then, the shot came. Crack. Echo. Pain. Elias jerked in the saddle, then collapsed, sliding hard into the dust. "Elias!" Mira screamed, leaping down. Blood spread across his side, dark and fast. "Keep going," he rasped. "Number." Another shot tore past, striking rock behind them. 2 riders appeared on the ridgeline, rifles raised. Elias groaned, trying to lift himself. "We have to move." Mira didn't hesitate, hooked her arm under his shoulder, pulled with everything she had. "Believe me," he growled. "I won't be here." Through sheer will, they stumbled toward the rocks. Bullets cut the night. Dust flew, but somehow they made it. A narrow gap between cliffs swallowed them in. The riders wouldn't follow. Not yet. Not through this pass. In the dark hollow, Elias collapsed to his knees, blood soaking through his shirt. Face pale, he looked up at her, wonder and pain tangled in his eyes. "You said you wanted to be my wife." Mira knelt beside him, cupped his face. "I meant it." His lips curved, even through the pain. "Then we'd better make it through this pass." She nodded, fierce now. Steady. And for the first time in her life, Mira Tahoma prayed, not to the God the soldiers brought, but to the spirits of fire, of wind, of survival, because love out here was a gamble. And that night, they were betting everything. Weeks later, the tent flaps rustled gently in the river breeze. Moonlight slipped through the seams like silver thread. Outside, crickets sang low. Water whispered over stone. Inside, Elias lay propped on folded blankets. His breath was slow, but strong. The fever had passed. Beside him, Mira Ayanna. Her true name sat with a basin, gently wiping his brow. He watched her through half-lidded eyes. His voice came soft. "You always this bossy with your patients?" She smirked. "Only the ones too stubborn to die." He chuckled, then winced. She hushed him, pressing a hand to his chest. The silence settled again. Not empty. Full. Then his voice again. "Tell me something true." She paused, then took his hand, placed it over her heart. "Ayanna," she said. "It means peaceful river. My father gave it to me." Elias closed his eyes, let the name settle like a prayer. "Ayanna," he whispered back. "You're the only peace I've ever known." She didn't cry this time. She just held his hand tighter. And months passed. South of the border, where mesquite trees bend in the wind, a small lodge of pine and hide stood near a quiet river. No flag, no name, just wildflowers and soft laughter. Ayanna Salvatierra sat beneath the awning, stitching a tiny white shirt. Her belly rounded gently beneath her sash. Inside, the walls bore no trophies. No past, just bundles of herbs, 2 books, and a child's blanket waiting to be finished. Outside, Elias trained a young Mustang, murmuring low commands. Now and then, he looked back toward the house. Every time he saw her silhouette through the curtain, He smiled. That evening, she walked to the river, stepped into the shallows, laid both hands over her belly. "Little one," she whispered, "your father didn't just forgive. He loved, and he kept his promise." Footsteps approached. Elias joined her, said nothing, just stood beside her, their fingers intertwining without a word. Together, they watched the water drift under dusk, where stars blinked alive. No one had expected two hunted souls to find something like this, but in a world of scars and storms, they had carved out a quiet place, a home, a life, a love that would not be written in books, but would endure, like the river, peaceful and true. In the dust-choked silence of the Wild West, justice wasn't always found in courtrooms, it was found in choices, in who we protect, in what we believe, and in whether we choose to see a person's heart, or just the skin they wear. This story reminds us that healing doesn't always come with grand gestures. Sometimes it's in a hand pressed to the dirt beside someone else's pain. Sometimes it's in standing between a wounded soul and the world that wants to break them. And sometimes, if we're brave enough, love becomes the rebellion. If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you that compassion is louder than hatred, that even in the harshest deserts, love can still take root, then you're not alone. Subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more tales of quiet bravery, forbidden connection, and the kind of love that survives not because it's easy, but because it chooses to stay. New stories every week. Old souls welcome always. Because some wounds need more than time. They need a witness.